Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to go through the economics of running a CPG consumables brand, whether that's in the food and snack niche, the drink niche, or maybe a household good consumable. I'm going to really walk you through what the economics should look like from first order to subscription and how the actual buying process works on the consumer side. We're going to go through some different ad strategies, some different strategies to increase average order value, talk about first order profitability, and really just what your goals and kind of expectations should be when running a CPG consumables brand. All right, so let's go ahead and hop right into it. So let's go through the overall arching picture of like how a CPG buying flow works. And again, I'm going to specifically be talking mostly about a consumable product like a snack or drink brand, or maybe like a household consumable here. So there's really three stages to a CPG brand. There's the kind of taste test phase, and this is very true for food, but also anything consumable, even cosmetics or skincare. It's kind of testing the product, seeing if it works. Very true for household goods as well. Then we go into the phase which we call the indulge phase, which is after you've tested it and either you're never coming back again or you're probably going to like it and continue to use that product. So now you're getting a lot more of the product. You're maybe trying other varieties of that product that you have yet to. And then after that, we get into the connoisseur phase, which is typically where you hop onto a subscription and or just become a very regular user of this product and consume it monthly or really throughout the entire year. So these are the three phases of CPG. And a big challenge, and typically the biggest challenge for CPG brands, is twofold. The first is getting a customer in the door at least at break even and ideally profitably. The second is making sure they can get enough cash flow to make up for that acquisition cost and to make that customer as profitable as possible. So it's really a retention play and an acquisition play. And this is true for all D2C and e-commerce brands, but it's the most important and really the most volatile within a CPG brand. So let's go through what these economics should actually look like. So during the taste test period, you're typically going to be acquiring a customer through a paid channel, Amazon ads, Meta ads, maybe paying for some affiliates via TikTok Shop, in which you still have a variable cost associated per order. But at this point, realistically, most CPG brands should really just be aiming for a 5% or more margin. And realistically, 5 to 10% margin on that first order is about as good as it gets, unless you're a big brand like Athletic Greens with a $107 first order. In most cases, you're going to be more like a brand like Papaya that sells reusable kind of paper towels where you have like a $38 to $50 AOV. And with these brands, typically your margin is going to be in the low single-digit percents. So this is really your contribution margin, your net profit, all your COGS, your shipping, returns, all included within this. That's typically what I would be expecting for most CPG brands. And the reason you need at least a little bit of profit on that first order is just for the fluctuation in acquisition costs and to just make it worth your while to acquire those customers. CPG brands that break even on first order are just at a much higher risk for when things get a little volatile on the acquisition side, whether it's an ad channel issue, whether it's an economic issue. And so it's really important to at least have a small percentage buffer of profit or net profit before fixed costs on those initial orders. So again, most brands really should be aiming for that 5% margin. And again, it just really does depend on your cash position, but most CPG brands really should have a good cash position so they can float cost at least for 60 days if they need to make up more profit per order. Okay, so I would say in general, CPG brands do need to consider at least a 5% margin, and that really should be the target. Now, the goal of the first order is not to technically maximize AOV. I think a lot of brands try to cash out on customers on that very first order, especially in the CPG niche, because they're so concerned about trying to be as profitable as possible in that first order, which is a really good goal to have. But the more important goal to have after you hit at least that 5% margin point and are in a decent cash position is you really should just be exposing people to your product line. The main goal of that first order is to try out every variety of your product possible. And if you have different flavors, that's going to look like different flavors. If you have different versions or effects of your products, it's trying out those different versions of those products. If the only variation in your product is like a design or something in that sense, it's getting people to have a collection of different designs. So really you want to expose people to that product line as much as possible. That is the key goal here. And again, I would say that takes precedence over trying to get from a 5 to 10% margin. I would typically always focus on getting more product line exposure. The correlation between customers that buy a lot of variety of products on that very first order and who have a 5 or 10x fold LTV down the line is very, very high. The customers that try the most in that first order, that get exposed to the product, different products, have a higher chance of coming back in the first place. And when they do, each subsequent order is typically higher. So really it's about getting as many products into that first order as possible and having them be able to taste test and try everything out. Okay. Now going over to the indulgence side, this typically looks like a second or third order. And really at this point, they should be coming back organically. You shouldn't have to pay to reacquire them. And as long as they like the product, they should be coming back at like a 20% margin, including that initial acquisition cost. So at this point, you should be making more on the order because they came back through a more organic channel. And at this point, the goal is indulgence, is to get them to buy a bigger quantity of those products from the variety sets or from the bundles that they enjoyed earlier. And at this point, you want to be adding an extra 50% to your AOV. So if that first order was $50, this order should be at least 50 to 75 ideally. So you want to at least be adding that 50% if possible to that second order. Now that's not always the case, but in general, like you should be adding more to these different orders here. And even if you can get a second order for $25 or half your AOV, you're still going to be in a really good cash position there. From second and third order, we're looking at third order plus. So really after 3 orders, someone should be a subscriber. As long as you size the packages properly and make sure that the quantity per order of whatever the consumable is makes sense to run out in a meaningful time frame. So a really important thing with each of these steps is making sure your sample sizes and your bigger sizes of products are really well timed out to make sense to have people come back in a time frame that works for you and the customer. And I think a lot of brands either include too much in each order, in each quantity of SKU, and or not enough. But as far as the Connoisseur goes, at this point, we really want to be at a 30% margin. They should definitely be coming back for a subscription pretty much organically most of the time. And at this point, your only goal is to keep them on a subscription. And the way you do that is by surprising and delighting, whether that's new samples that are just freebies in the subscription box, whether that's adding them to early access to new additions, flavors, whatever it may be, adding them into kind of a VIP club where they get special discounts on products. That's what you want to be doing, okay? Now, let me actually show you kind of a real world example of what this looks like. So I'm going to show you some real orders here for a CPG brand, and I'll kind of walk you through like what this actually looks like when you go ahead and do this. So this first order here was on April 24th, 2024, and they bought 2 products. They bought a variety pack, kind of like sampler product, and then they bought 4 of these other sampler products. So they're exposed to a few different versions of the product, a few different flavors per se, and so they got a pretty good taste of that product line. Then they came back on May 4th, so not too much later, and now they're buying the bigger packs. They came back, they tried a few different things, they came and they basically said, hey, I really just like this one product, and they spent $174 on the second order. So while that first order was only $35, that second order is $175, and they've kind of honed in and they're indulging in what they liked, then eventually they'll become a subscriber. Now this was too recent for them to become a subscriber. I would expect in the next 2 to 3 orders that they would become one. But once you become a subscriber, obviously this is where the real value is made. For example, this customer has spent $10,000, has 42 orders, and has been a customer for 7 years. And every time they order, they're on a subscription and they get multiple products that they like. So this is kind of the buying flow. And so really the goal is figuring out how you can make your acquisition numbers and your margins and your package sizing make sense to get people in that door, get them to try everything up front, get them to indulge in the products, and then ultimately have them become a connoisseur and hop on a subscription. That is what the ideal CPG order flow looks like. And there's a lot that goes into this. So let's actually get into some more of the numbers and how this actually works. So Again, with taste tests, we want to hit that 5% margin. We want to expose people to the product line. And ideally, in most cases, if you're going to be using an ad platform to do this, which for most people you are, or even with paid affiliates, you're going to need a $50 plus first order value. You can get away with 35 to 40 depending on the brand, but most of the time you really do need around a $50 first order AOV just with the general costs of running ads these days. So how do you actually get there? How do you get to that first order level to where you can be making a low amount of margin to kind of give yourself a buffer? There's a few different ways to do this. The first is sample packs, right? Where you go ahead, you get a few of your different units or varieties and just put them in a sample pack with a little bit of each product. This is a great way to, number one, optimize for a higher AOV because you can simply charge more because you can have a wide variety of samples depending on your product line. You also expose them to as many products as possible, which again, we know has a high correlation to a higher LTV compared to a customer who has not tried everything up front. So this is really probably the best thing to focus on when you're trying to hit that first $50 AOV, okay? The second thing is bundle builders and boxes. So adding in an app to let people build their own bundle, and with that bundle, they get a slight discount, right? And or just having pre-built bundles that people can buy, again, at a slight discount on a per SKU basis. Again, in these bundles, we want to incentivize trying different products, and in these boxes, we want to do the same, okay? The next biggest lever to pull is going to be a free shipping threshold. Now, customers do expect free shipping for the most part, but at the same time, they understand that you're not Amazon and you can't cover that logistic cost all the time. So having a free shipping threshold at $40, $50 is a great way for people just to add in that one more sample, that one more bundle, whatever it is, in order to get that AOV that makes sense for you. So free shipping, sample packs, bundles, and boxes, those are the biggest levers for every CPG brand to leverage, especially when you're in the consumable space. And those are really, really important. Some other things you can do within the cart and when people are adding products is incentivizing things with discounted free gifts. Whether that's some sort of cool spoon with your logo on it, you'll see frothers that have the brand's logo on it for like a drink brand, for instance. You'll see free cups with other brands, just accessories that go along with your product that are very high margin, very cheap to produce, and that you can pretty much just white label. Those are typically what you see. Now, these can help add a couple percent to your first order value, but in general, I don't think these are as high of a lever as the sample packs and some of these other options here, but they can kind of push you over the edge if you're stuck at like a $35 first average order value, okay? And then we get into the guarantee. Now, at this point, every CPG brand, every consumable brand pretty much needs some sort of 30-day guarantee. That's like, hey, if you don't like the product, it's just free. And what this does is it just boosts that CVR, that conversion rate a little bit more to get people over the edge to go ahead and try your product for that taste test period. So again, this is very, very essential, but it's extremely important when someone's about to shell out $50 on something they might not like within 3 seconds of trying it. That's really the problem. So very important to have that there. And as far as channels go, the most profitable in most cases are really going to be meta ads, TikTok Shop, affiliates, and Amazon. You can do Google, you can do Pinterest. Organic's always a good thing to have, but in terms of driving demand predictably and profitably, it's still going to be these channels. This is really what we're seeing in the space. That's, these are really the best ways to do that, okay? I'm not going to be going over ads or specific assets to use in order to drive these new customers, but what I will say when it comes to CPG, especially in the consumable food space, making niche specific ads that call out a very specific type of customer typically works best. So if you have a supplement product or a food product, calling out who that product is for, maybe it's busy moms, maybe it's college students, maybe it's multiple layers of these different demographics, calling them out specifically and why that product is perfect for them, those are typically some of the best ads that you're going to have. So would definitely recommend that approach to advertising, but I won't be going through that in too much detail here, okay? So the journey from the taste test to the indulgence phase can be a long one for some brands. And typically the issue comes up when people are not consuming your product fast enough. And this is usually due to a problem with how much you're including on that first order. So you need to hit that first order $50 AOV point, but you can't be giving them so much product that they're not going to come back for 6 months. That is not sustainable. I've seen it happen where brands do have maybe an $80 first average order value, but that customer literally does not come back for 6 months because the product lasts so long. That is not sustainable. You really ideally want people to be coming back in around 60 days. Less is always better, but 60 days should really be the goal here for that second to third order. So you want to shorten that period as much as possible and make sure you're sizing out that average first order to be appropriately used within that 60 days. And so that means maybe including less in your sample pack, or maybe including less in that bundle, or simply just increasing prices a little bit. You need to make sure that times out right in order to get to this indulgence phase, okay? So when we get to the indulgence phase, at this point, we want to have a combined 20% margin. So not 20% margin on this specific order, but between the first taste test and this order here, we want to have a 20% margin on that customer. Meaning we probably did not have to use an ad to get them in again to the indulgence order or to that second and third order. So in this case, we just want to make sure that we're leveraging email and SMS and organic channels in order to reach them. And as long as the product's pretty good and you're kind of just reminding them maybe with a text every now and again, or maybe an email every now and again, and some organic content, they should come back. You should have a high percent of people that are coming back. And now a really important question is, how long does it take for someone to go from your first to second order or first and third order? And then what does your average order value look like on your second and third order? Okay. And then of course, what percent of people from that first order actually ever order twice or a third time? So once you have the answer to those questions, you can really figure out, hey, what do we need to optimize here on our messaging in order to get people back sooner, in order to get more people back at all, or to get more people back buying more. Okay, and at this point, again, we want them to have spent at least around $75. So ideally, the second order should be the same as that first order, but if it's 50% less, that's okay. At this point, by that second and third order, they should have spent around $75. So that's the ideal. Now, in this case, when you're on this second order, you want them to be more indulged in your product line. At this point, they should have tried quite a few things. Maybe they have a couple more products they haven't tried, in which case the bundle builder, the boxes, and the free shipping threshold are still very essential in order to expose them to more of the product line that they may have not seen yet. But at this point, they should just be buying a bigger quantity of products. And so here, adding in that discounted free gift more bluntly is really important. Maybe introducing a discounted gift card, right? Because at this point, they're a little bit more committed, and a discounted gift card is basically free cash to them. So that could get them to come back an extra time after this order, and this could be a way to incentivize them. And of course, the guarantee is still important on this order, but not as much because at this point, again, they should have already been exposed to the product line, okay? So that's how the indulgence phase looks. And again, like with this particular order, they ordered $174 worth of product after that initial $35 order. So they definitely indulged. They went all in on one SKU and bought a lot of it. Right? So that's exactly what that should look like. Okay. So now we get into the final phase, which is the connoisseur phase, and ideally a subscriber. And at this point, again, we want to shorten this period as much as possible. So another great question is, from first order to subscription, how long does that take on average? If someone doesn't subscribe on first order, and you should look at percent of people that subscribe on first order, but if someone doesn't, what percent of people actually become subscribers at any point? And then on average, how long does it take between first order to subscription? And then you can also look at from second or third order, depending on what your product is in buying flow, what is that second to third order conversion rate to subscription, and how long does that period take? We want to map out this entire customer journey on average, right? And again, we want this to be as short as possible, but ideally from second to third order, if they don't subscribe at that point, should be no longer than 2 to 4 months. If they're coming back a third time, we expect them to subscribe. And in general, that's what you should also expect, right? So at this point, we want to reactivate the customer with around a 30% plus combined margin. So now, again, they should be coming back through again an organic channel. We shouldn't really have to use an ad or anything paid other than fixed costs on email to get them in as a subscriber. And so at this point, from your initial cost per acquisition via a paid channel, most likely, or a paid affiliate, at this point, you should be seeing a 30% plus margin. So that's really what we would expect. And again, now we're all about surprise and delighting that customer to keep them in as a subscriber. So the best ways to do this are new variations of product, new flavors, new additions, seasonal specials. You have to really be releasing something interesting about every quarter or more. And that's really the minimum that's required in order to keep people interested and keeping their subscription active, and throwing them freebies, right? New samples of products, merch, whatever it is, whatever you can afford. That goes a very long way in keeping that subscription running, because it helps them realize that it's worth it, and it keeps that excitement going around, hey, maybe I'm going to get something free next month. That's a fantastic way, and really the best way to keep people in addition to those new variations, okay? VIP access is also great. And there's a lot of different ways to do this, whether that's accumulating points per order that they can use to get money off in future orders, whether that's getting early access to sales and discounts. There's a lot you can do with this. There's a lot of apps out there, but I would highly recommend a VIP program for your subscribers and your connoisseurs. And of course, as I mentioned, this is very much tied into discounts and getting them early access to what you can. So really incentivize that subscription, right? Obviously, a subscriber should have some sort of 5 to 10% or even 20% savings on a per SKU basis. But in addition to that, add them into a VIP program and really make them feel special, because these people can create such a high amount of volume and a high amount of margin for the business that it's really worth it, okay? So that's really what the CPG buying flow looks like. And I would say this is what the average CPG buying flow should look like, and this is what your expectations should be for your business, or better. Brands that can't make this work are typically not profitable or have funding that will eventually run out. It's very hard to make this work if you're not at this point or better with the margins, with the buying periods, etc. Now, of course, higher AOVs can offset longer buying cycles. Shorter buying cycles can offset lower AOVs. But in general, this is kind of the flow that you need to see. Okay, so figure out if your flow is broken at all, what needs to be improved. Maybe it's a better email drip flow to get them from the taste test to the indulgence phase. Maybe it's a better drip flow from the indulgence to the connoisseur phase. Whatever that needs to be, figure it out, okay? Perfect. So let's actually hop into some numbers here and kind of talk about how this works. So this is a real example of a cohort model just from the Shopify Analytics dashboard. And we can see on average, new customers these are mostly ad people, new customers who are paid for via ads typically generate around $55 on that first order, okay? But by month 3, so within 90 days, they're actually worth 87. So they come back and buy another, 30 something dollars worth of product. And by month 11, our projected amount for these customers that bought in April as their first order is around $120. So the question for your brand is really, how long can you float cash and how much risk are you willing to take in order to acquire new customers? And really, what does your profitability threshold look like at a near-term basis compared to really what your growth velocity is, right? Because the more customers you acquire today, the faster you're going to grow, but the higher your cost per customer acquisition is going to be. So what does that balance look like for you? And I'll actually walk you through all of the numbers here so you can kind of see how we think about this. So we're going to kind of layer these models right next to each other. This is our cost calculator and spend level model, which you can get access to. I'll leave a link below actually. And we can see that our average first order value here is just about $55, right? But within 90 days, again, our customers are actually worth $87. In this particular instance, including all of our product costs, all our variable costs, our contribution margin is around 50%. So that's just the percent of our average order value that could be net profit before any acquisition costs, right? So when we look at this, what we see is that, hey, if we want to achieve a 20% margin, so if we want 20% of our AOV to be net profit, so basically profit before fixed costs, what could we pay to acquire this customer? And if we want 20% of our $55 AOV to acquire this customer, we would be able to pay $16.44, which is a 3.35 return on ad spend, right? In this case, if we wanted to be that profitable, we wanted to make 20% margin on the first order, that would be what we need on ads, which for you might be realistic or it might not be, depending on the product, the niche, the ad environment you're operating in, etc. But if we optimize for 90-day value, which is $87, quite a bit higher than our first average order value, then we can justify a higher CPA. So if we wanted to make that same 20% margin, but wait 90 days to do so, then we could actually go ahead and pay a $26 cost per acquisition. So we can pay about $10 more to acquire a customer if we're willing to wait that 90 days. So this is really the question you need to ask yourself and kind of your team is, how long can we wait to accrue this future value? Can we float cash with our inventory and our OPEX and all that good stuff in order to do this? And really, how long are you willing to wait, or are you willing to sacrifice speed of growth for near-term profitability? Because you can simply spend a lot more on ads and acquire a lot more customers sooner if you're willing to spend that $26 on your CPA than if you're willing to spend that $16. So it's really a question for the brand. Now, again, to kind of walk you through this a little bit more, what this would look like if we spent $26 to acquire a customer, that first order would only be $55. Our ad account will show us a 2.12 ROAS. And we'll say, oh, that's actually pretty low. We're not making 20% margin. On that first order, we're actually only making 5% margin because we're paying $26 to acquire this customer, and they are producing us on a first order $55 in average order value, and that gives us about 5% target margin. But because our target margin is actually 20%, and we know that in 90 days our customers are worth around $87, by the time 90 days pass and some of those customers come back to order more completely organically, then our ROAS actually goes up to a 3.35 within that 90 days, and our ultimate cost per acquisition is still $26, but now that customer has actually been worth to us over the 90 days $87. So again, this is what you have to think about, and you have to figure out what time period is ideal for your brand and what your ideal margin is and how much therefore you can pay to acquire a customer. Now, when we think about subscribers, things get a little bit more interesting. Again, in this example, within 12 months, our customers are worth around $120, which is quite a bit more than their first orders, typically double whatever that first order is. So they really do come back on average. But depending on the brand, we can't justify a 12-month wait to finally find profit in our customers. We just can't do that. But depending on the funding situation, depending on what the goals are, you may be able to justify a 6-month wait or a 12-month wait in order to acquire profit from your customers. And so here we have a first order ROAS, and given our subscription or our subscriber 1-year value, we could actually justify paying up to $92 to acquire a customer, which would still net us out 20% margin. But on that first order, our ROAS is going to look like a 1.62. But after that 12 months pass, then it'll come back to that 3.35 ROAS. So again, these are the questions you need to be asking, and this is how stuff actually looks in reality when you're growing a CPG brand and you're trying to rely on future value to make up for initial acquisition costs. Okay, so that's it for today. If anyone's interested, happy to go through a ad approach and acquiring customers at your target margin and your target ROAS for that first order, and or going through more of the retention that goes into getting them to come back a second, third, and fourth plus time. Okay? Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.